couple $1,000s on a camera. So this is in an IoT device, right? So if we think about, right, embedded scaling, right, the next place that I would think that you would want to scale up to is either going to be a phone or a desktop application.
Okay. I do have a phone that
Sure. So let's take a look at that. Svava says, yes, that would be a lot of camera. Yes, just to take a picture and have it mounted on a little tripod in my basement while Tom's getting set up here. I'm going to cut over. So, nope. Okay, we can stay there. To have that big a camera sitting in my basement is going to be a waste, and I'd rather use that out taking pictures of my kids' activities and travel and all that stuff. DevLead says, or by an oil level sensor. Well, then you have to cut into the oil tank and put it in there and all kinds of stuff. I'm an IoT person. I'm a developer. I write code to solve problems. Let's see here. Oh, and thank you. Janescu has actually linked to the Jetson Nano developer kit for us in the chat room. Thank you so much. Yeah, very cool. All right. So that is, which type of phone is that? It's an Android phone, but which one?
It's an Android. It's an old Moto that we picked up for next to nothing, and we get to play with here. And so we wrote an app using the Android SDK kit.
Okay.
And I'll show you the app first, and then if there's interest, we can look at the code that goes with it. So this is a very naive decibel meter.
Okay.
And what we're looking at here is every 10th of a second, it's sampling the speaker, the microphone that's on the phone, calculating a decibel value and writing that to the database. And then the next two lines, it's doing queries to get the average over the last second and then the average over the last 10 seconds. And then the last line is just doing a count of the number of entries in the database of those values. And in this demo, I should mention that in the other one, we were using an interface that's sort of a NoSQL interface. We call it the btrieve interface. And in this demo, we're using our SQL side. So we'll get to look and see what that looks like. And in this demo, we're actually using an embedded SQL product that we have.
Okay, so different ways to interact, get the same interaction with a Zen database, two different facades, btrieve and SQL.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, as somebody who's a SQL first developer, I like that. Right now you're talking about a language that I know how to speak. Give me my select star from customers' interactions there. Okay. Hugo is suggesting that I'm avoiding saying that I'm frugal. No, not at all. Gosh.
Oh my.
That is not what I'm saying at all. If you change the seals on an oil tank, it needs to be inspected. I don't want somebody to come out and inspecting my house just because I'm putting in a new gauge. So, RJF96 says, using a database feels like overkill. You could just use an array. Well, for the purposes of the demo, it shows off things here. Yes, it's in memory, but if you wanted to persist beyond just being in memory, you can't use an array.
That's correct. It's worth saying too that I think that if we run on Zen runs on ARM, it runs on Intel, AMD, it runs on multiple OSs. So one of the things you get, in addition to being able to persist it, is it's been very carefully designed so that the byte order and the structure of the bytes written in a record are the same regardless of the OS or the platform.
Oh.
So in the case of an array, that's going to be very specific to the language and the architecture. So with us, you could actually take the table that you wrote, the underlying file you wrote, and move it from that Jetson board running Ubuntu on ARM and bring it over to a Windows server on an Intel and read that file in, and everything just works. There's no translation necessary at all. So that's another thing that the database layers is handling for you, and you don't have to worry about.
Okay, now you've got my interest peaked a little bit more there. I want to see a little bit more about the Android app that you have here, but that portability, being able to transport it across form factors, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's once again, that's one of those things that we did, and we didn't realize what a big deal it is, but we talked to people, and people get really excited about that, because it is, now that ARM has taken off, and Linux is doing well, and Windows is still doing well. There's in Android, of course. There's iOS. We run on iOS. So
sure.
It could be a real cost to a company to try to support those multiple platforms if you don't choose your database management wisely.
Oh, I'm thinking about all the different ways that folks that are in the field need to synchronize their devices, right? Java, right? Or
yes.
Right, and it's got their specific libraries and things. And yes, there was a critique, of course, folks saying so many magic strings. Okay, about the strings, and it's a demo. Come on, it's easier to see the strings in a demo. My gosh, but fine. You want to refactor and write your code your way, chat room. So
I'm a database programmer. What can I say?
Absolutely, right? The acronyms. Okay, so looks like, so what do we have here? This is your main activity.
Right. So I'm not a Java programmer. I freely admit it. And this was my first Android app. So constructive criticism is of course always welcome. But what I've done here is for my own peace of mind, since I was much more comfortable in C++, I wrote the GUI part of it, the pretty stuff you see. I wrote that all in Java. And if you've written Android apps, I'm sure this all looks familiar to you. There's the onCreate, and then here's the thread that runs, doing the updates, sleeping a tenth of a second. Once again, none of this is database stuff. Oh, here's where we open the media device. And if you want to, actually this source code, if you'd like to get your hands on it and play with the embedded library on Android, if you go to our website, you can download our SDK for free, and this comes in that SDK. You don't need any sort of license to run this.
Nice. Do you have a link for that we can share with the folks in the chat room?
My best. Let's see. Well, you can always go to Actian.com, and if you go to products and Zen Embedded Database, honestly, I'm going to have to admit that I haven't done this on the new website. So at this point, I'm probably just wasting your time. Oh, here we go. Download. And from there, I wish you best of luck. SDKs.
Fantastic.
B14 evaluation. So here you go.
And there's the Android one.
Yep.
So that's esdactian.com/product/Zen_PSQL. Nice. And there's all the different options. Right?
That's not hard to figure out at all. Even I can do that.
It's amazing. I don't know my way around my own all the databases that we have with my employer. My gosh, so many of them. I'm going to share that link in the chat room there. There you go.
Perfect.
So that folks can get their hands on it if they want to take a look. And folks in the chat room are asking, what was Zen an acronym for again? Zero effort needed? No. It's pretty close.
If we use that, do we have to give you royalty?
No, not me. I think it's, yeah.
It stands for, but I like yours. I like yours better. Whoever came up with that.
You hear that? This is Copper Beardy in the chat room there.
Thank you very much. 0 dBA embeddable nano footprint.
There you go.
Yeah.
0 dBA embeddable nano footprint.
I'm going to go visit our marketing guy after this.
Absolutely.
That's pretty clever.
Zero effort needed, zero, whatever. Okay, so we started seeing a little bit of the Android code, but we didn't get. We saw all the stuff to connect to the sensors and that kind of thing. The actual call into the database, though, right? You're using a SQL interface this time.
Yeah. So that was. I just wanted to show you that flow, and here's where we're going to call us. So. I've written some wrappers, get 1 second average. Well, let me back up a little bit. So here's where we get the value. So here's store and calculate, and that's the every 10th of a second value that I talked about. And here's the get 1 second average, the get 10 second average, and the get sample count. And that all corresponds to those four graphical elements that I meant that we saw earlier.
Okay.
Now go down here. As I mentioned, I'm not a Java programmer, so when I wrote this, I wrote it in C++, and Java has this wonderful ability to call JNI code, right? So
nice. I
wrote this in C++. I should say though that we do have a Java interface to the product, and you're always welcome to use that. Here's the JNI layer. So I'm trying not to give everybody a headache by scrolling too fast here.
But you're just putting together some simple SQL statements that you're executing on the.
So here's the store and calculate call. And if you're used to ODBC or in SQL, you're going to recognize this immediately. Here's the insert into the table. So I'm building up the SQL string, and then I'm doing an exec direct. And some people might immediately say, wow, an exec direct, that's terribly slow. Why didn't you prepare these and keep these around and do execs? Well, I didn't need to, because this is so fast that the database side of it just doesn't even really count. You could, of course, do that, but for these simpler queries, it wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
And here's the average. Good old SQL, right? There's the where clause. There's the average over the last, I think that's the last second.
Simple aggregate, right? We learned that back in high school.
That's right. Simple, here's the last 10 seconds. And then here's the select count. That's the number of elements that are in the table, right?
Yeah.
Then here is where I take care of the keeping the table from getting too big. So anything that's over 60 seconds old gets deleted out of the table.
Okay. There's a question in the chat room about some of the aggregates that you use. They're pretty standard ones, average, count. You probably have support also for min and max in the SQL dialect. The question here is there support for custom aggregate functions?
Well, I do not believe we do not support C++ or C code being put into the I don't even know how to say that. I'm not really a SQL programmer, but I have a helper over here off camera. She's over there shaking her head no. Okay. So the answer is no.
That's part of keep minimizing some of that bloat. If you don't, you can do some of that work when you get the data out, if you need to do custom aggregation.
Yes, I should say, though, this is a good opportunity to say that the embedded SQL library is has the exact same capability of our typical client-server SQL interface. Our regular product that runs on like Windows Server or runs on the Linux is a traditional SQL database, fully ANSI database. And this embedded library has I can tell you, it runs on the exact same code. So it has all the functionality. So if you wrote something using the SQL, say for the embedded library, and then you wanted to move that code or that knowledge that you've gained over to our normal product, it would just translate. There would be no new limited thing you had to deal with.
Okay, so now you've got me thinking that you've got a really cool portability story, right? We talked about it, instead of doing ETL and moving things from my Android application or from my IoT device into the cloud, where I've got a full-scale cloud strength server that's running Zen database. I could still use the exact same SQL dialect that I have in my Android device, lift that up, drop it into an Azure function or an AWS Lambda, and get the exact same performance against another Zen database that maybe is being replicated into. So just like you were showing us with PHP putting data on a web page, I could do the exact same things. Now I've got the exact same logic and the exact same syntax.
Yes.
Across multiple platforms.
Yes, and here where I've done the delete, this could just as easily be me talking to a cloud instance of Zen, and this could be instead of just a simple delete, I could be inserting to a table up in the cloud as well. So I would keep a cache locally, and then when I had connectivity, I could move things up to the cloud with the exact same library, because the library actually has client server built in. It's just in this case, for this demo, we're pointing to a local instance instead of a cloud instance.
So let me come back and reinforce. There's a question here about having a .NET provider. There is now a .NET, a provider you can use with C# with VB. That's .NET standard.
Yes.
So to exactly your point, I can compile a .NET standard library that references the Zen provider. And if I'm running on a Raspberry Pi with .NET standard, or running a little .NET Core app on, like I'm doing with my Raspberry Pi, I can use that exact same library with the exact same select, insert, and delete statements, lift up, reuse that library now in my Azure functions, and get the exact same interaction. I don't have to recompile or anything because it's .NET standard. I'm referencing it, the exact same syntax everywhere. That portability is tremendously powerful.
Yeah, it's a great story, and my assistant again off camera. I'm really glad Linda's here. It's Linda Anderson. She said that the .NET that we're talking about is available on that same page that we were just at.
Terrific. Hugo says, "Thank you, Linda." There you go. Fuel Snable asks, "How do you deal with diverging schemas as you're versioning and improving your database?"
Well, I guess I can say this two ways. The product itself has a long history of being backward compatible. So we're never going to break you because you upgraded our product. We can still read tables that are 15, 20 years old.
Okay.
So we really, really believe that around here. Now, if you change your own schema,
yeah,
that's up to you. Right?
You've got to manage that interaction on your own.
I should say, though, that the btree side, which I mentioned earlier, it supports a type called JSON. And that's one of the beauties of JSON, right? And in the camera demo, that's what I used. If you look down at the table, it's really only got 3 fields. It's got a document ID, which is this auto increment integer, and it's got a clob, or what we call it. We have a special version of clob called JSON, and then it has a blob. And because of that, I can change willy-nilly what I want to store in that JSON.
Okay.
And it doesn't really matter. And that's the beauty of it, right? And we have the ability to query that JSON for you as well. So it's not just a simple cloud.
So Fuel Snable is pointing out that they, at his organization, their organization, they have JSON schema hell, they're describing it, with apps with different views of the JSON schema out there. Yeah, good luck. That's right. That's not something a database provider is going to be able to manage, that schema inside of that JSON clob, that large character array that's hanging off the end, right, that you're able to use as expandable, no schema storage there.
Yeah, it's kind of like the attic, right? You shove things up there.
For me, it's my garage. Just throw stuff in there. Look,
I should say that what we've noticed internally people do is they'll create another table that has the thing that they care about and that every record's going to have.
Oh.
And then they index that, and then they have I mentioned the document ID, and then they have a table there. They have a row in that schema that points back to the main repository, if you will, that has the other JSON and the blob. And so it's kind of a wonderful way of having the performance benefits of a traditional record format of a fixed schema with indexing and all that, but still giving you the niceties of having JSON, where you don't necessarily have to have a complete understanding of your of your metadata or your schema, at the very beginning.
And that feels almost like an old school data warehousing type of approach right? You set up a star schema. You know what? I need this extra little thing that I originally was putting in JSON. Just create another table that is foreign key, and here's that one field that I'm looking for.
Absolutely. And people, I don't think traditionally have thought of that in embedded apps, because that would mean, for most of them, that would mean a whole lot of work, especially if they're rolling their own files.
Yeah,
but when you have a fully functional, traditional style database interface like we have, suddenly it becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions here about database features. Let me just run down them here real quick. Hugo asks, did Tom say you can work with the JSON data? You can query the JSON data that's in that club hanging on a table.
Absolutely. And if we have time and if you're interested, Jeff, we can take a look at some of that.
Sure. Let me hit one more question here. Fuel Snable asks about columnar storage. Is that supported? Yes, you have columns.
We don't. Our product itself doesn't store in a. I think when people say columnar, they're thinking of high performant databases, right? Where the data is not in the same file, that it's actually in separate files. No, Zen does not do that. Actian has product that does that. It's very fast at analytics. But no, we store it as a traditional file, but we certainly do have fixed schemas like you would expect from a traditional database. Yeah.
Nice. And there's a couple folks here in the chat room that are saying they're looking for similar features and in their database solutions, and Zen already has it for them. So yeah, there's definitely a subject. Flav Creation says this is a subject that they're looking into. Terrific. Well, there's a link we shared there earlier. If you want to download the Zen database, there's the link again in the chat room if you want to download and check it out. Right, did I see there was a free trial there?
Yes, there's a free trial for the embedded stuff, like what we've looked at on the Android here, is free, period. You can play with that all you want.
There you go.
The more traditional client server installs that ran on the Jetson, runs on Linux, runs on Windows, they have demo license. And you can always contact us if your demo license is going to expire and you need more time or you want to do some development. Yeah.
Yeah. The question came up that I actually, Hugo, I asked about that just before we got on. I'll ask about it anyway. So there is a question here about, can it run in browser on WebAssembly inside of the browser using local storage? And we were saying no, it doesn't support that currently.
No. The demo I showed is JavaScript making calls into Apache on the Jetson, running PHP scripts on the server side.
Right.
Yeah.
That type of progressive web application where they can have local storage embedded in the browser. You've already got local storage there. That's supported by everything. To bring another database into the picture might be a little tricky to do at this point. But there's a product idea.
Yeah, no, Linda already wrote that down.
That's great. And Flav Creation says, I'm looking for something small that works with Java just for storing usernames and a dozen or two images per user, some minor integer and string data. There you go. This would
perfect.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to stay schemaless, I would say just use the JSON and the blobs. If you don't have that much data, that you're never going to see any performance problem with that.
Yeah. So there is a question about comparison to SQLite. I'm going to skip that because we did talk about that a little bit earlier. You can rewind, take a look back at our talk about how this compares to SQLite and the differences between the two. So real simple with Android here. Our friend Carrie, she's in the chat room. She wrote an article she just sent over to me about using Zen with Windows IoT Core. Let me share that in the chat room for folks. There it is, over at Content Lab IO. Folks can learn more about how she did Windows IoT Core. So that's Windows UWP. That's a neat looking article that she wrote for checking out Zen. Thank you so much for sharing that, Carrie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm glad she did. I completely forgotten. We do support IoT as well.
Nice.